Ice King from Adventure Time seems a comedic yet antagonistic character. But similar to others, he's hiding his real story behind a facade of being a so-called king. The question arises, how did the Ice King become the beloved, humorously over-the-top villain who simply wants to kidnap Princess Bubblegum? Well, all of your questions about Ice King's origins will be answered. Although I'll warn you, this is a tale of sorrow, love, and loss. So get a box of tissues with you. This is the story of a man in love who studied archaeology and desired to acquire magical artifacts until everything surrounding him drives him insane, and how a cursed object that turned him into a villain, a clown, and eventually a forgotten hero. This is the full story of Simon Petrikov, the Ice King of Adventure Time. Let's open Pandora's box. We first meet in the Ice King in episode 3 of the first season, where Finn and Jake are sledging through the Ice Kingdom using an office chair. During their wild ride, they accidentally decapitate a snow golem, who then replaces his head with a cat's head. Eventually, the sledge gets destroyed, so Finn switches to riding on Jake's belly instead. They crash into a group of penguins and tumble down an ice chute, landing in front of the Ice King just as he is about to bury something in a shoebox. Upset by their intrusion into his territory, the Ice King calls upon a group of snow monsters to attack them, but Finn and Jake defeat the creatures without breaking a sweat. While they're celebrating, the Ice King freezes them in a block of ice. He wheels them off to his castle's prison with Lumpy Space Princess, Slime Princess, Wildberry Princess, Hot Dog Princess, Ghost Princess, Emerald Princess, and Raggedy Princess. The Ice King has been keeping 6 princesses captive for weeks, asking them weird questions and forcing them to play instruments so he can pick one to marry. Finn and Jake try to escape, but their attempts fail. Finn's flute breaks and Jake gets frozen mid-stretch.
Oh, no, you won't.
The princesses are bored and annoyed, especially after being read a weird book. Finn comes up with a plan. They fake having fun to lure the Ice King into the cell where Finn knocks him out. While unconscious, Ice King dreams of being called a sociopath by the Cosmic Owl. He wakes up to find everyone gone. The group celebrates, and Slime Princess says she'd marry Finn. But Jake jokes that Finn pees his pants, embarrassing him in front of the others.
You shouldn't marry Finn. He pees his pants constantly, all the time.
The first few encounters with the Ice King were rather serious and comedic. Still, it doesn't take long before Adventure Time begins to take a severe spiral downwards into a deep rabbit hole where every hilarious moment we know turns out to be a facade to hide trauma and loss. Brace yourselves. Before he was known as Ice King, there was once a man named Simon Petrikov, a dark-haired, olive-skinned human studying to be an antiquarian and working as a professor of archaeology with a PhD in an unknown field. He was entirely and madly interested in discovering some magical artifacts considered to be non-existent. To show everyone that the artifacts exist, he went on an expedition to find them, but unfortunately failed due to their seemingly false existence. As you see, however, he remained convinced they existed. After returning, he gave a presentation expressing interest in seeing the Enchiridion, only to be mocked by his peers for believing in magic and supposedly inexisting things. The mission flopped. Nothing. No magical relics, no artifacts, just more reasons for his colleagues to laugh at him. Still, Simon stayed convinced. Back at the university, he gave a presentation and expressed his interest in tracking down the Enchiridion, the legendary hero's manual. But instead of support, he got laughed off stage. No one took him seriously. But just before that talk, something unexpected happened. He met Betty Groff. Both of them reached for the same book. Instant connection. Betty was already a massive fan of his work and just as sharp as Simon. She asked for an autograph, pointed out some runes in the book, and mentioned something about the Southeast Cove. Simon saw her brilliance immediately and invited her to join his next trip. Betty dropped her plans to travel to Australia and went with him. Just like that, they were off on a journey that changed everything. They braved wild terrain, deciphered symbols, solved ancient puzzles, and somewhere along the way, they fell in love. Real love. Not just scholarly admiration, but something more profound. They found the Enchiridion. It was real. Simon had been right all along. Betty insisted he take the credit. He didn't want to, but she pushed. Headlines were written, professors changed their tune, and Simon finally got the recognition he had always hoped for. Betty, though, quietly returned to her original plans without fanfare. Weeks later, Simon found the same book from their first meeting. Inside was a note. Betty had left him a message, confessing her feelings and saying she wanted to travel with him, not just as a colleague, but as something more. Simon ran to the bus stop. He found her just in time. They admitted their feelings. No drama, no hesitation. Just two people who finally said what they had been holding in for too long. And from that moment, they were engaged. Simon had found magic, love, and someone who saw the world the way he did. For a brief, beautiful time, life was exactly how he dreamed it would be. There's an old VHS tape, dusty and grainy, but what it contains is one of the most heartbreaking records in Adventure Time history. The slow and painful unraveling of Simon Petrikov, captured moment by moment as he begins to lose himself to something far beyond his control. In the recording, Simon explains how he came across a strange jeweled crown, which he bought from an old dock worker in northern Scandinavia during his later career as an antiquarian. To him, it seemed like just another oddity, an ancient-looking piece with a large gem and a curious design, probably destined to sit on a shelf or spark conversation at a lecture. When he brought it home, he showed it to Betty, maybe hoping she'd be amused or intrigued. And then, without thinking, he placed it on his head as a joke. That one impulsive act shattered everything. The second the crown touched his head, reality began to warp. He was hit with disturbing visions that made no sense, terrifying images that burned into his mind and lingered even after he removed them. When he came to, Betty was gone. He didn't remember what had happened, only that something felt wrong and cold, and that whatever had just occurred, it had changed something deep inside him. In the episode Betty, we see what comes next. Simon running wildly through the streets, blasting ice into the sky, frantically calling out for her as Betty hides from him.
Where's my princess? Princess! Princess!
Not because she doesn't care, but because she no longer recognizes the man she once loved. What made it worse was that even when the crown was off, the visions continued. They haunted him, echoing in his mind and leaving him in a constant state of confusion. Slowly, his body began to change. His skin lost its color, his hair turned completely white, and his body temperature dropped to a steady 30 degrees Celsius. In the tape, he admits that he is scared, terrified, and the fear in his voice feels raw and honest, like someone desperately trying to hold on to what little of themselves is left. As the recordings go on, we see the shift. His voice becomes deeper, colder.
What had I done when I wore this crown? I know my mind is changing. Just watch over me until I can find my way out of this.
His face looks different. The Simon we knew is fading, and the Ice King is beginning to form. He confesses that his mind is slipping more each day, that his memories are growing cloudy, and that he no longer knows how to fix what's happening. He pleads with the viewer, not for pity or understanding, but simply for forgiveness in case he hurts someone without meaning to, because deep down, he is horrified by what he is turning into. By the final moments of the tape, Simon is barely there. His speech is slower, his eyes are full of tears, and he stares directly into the camera like it's his last chance to be heard. He begs whoever is watching to take care of him, to find somehow a way to bring him back if that is even possible anymore. And in the softest, most fragile voice, he says her name, Betty. He does not ask her to fix him. He does not ask her to come back. All he asks is that she still loves him, even if he no longer remembers how to love her, or even himself. This isn't just the story of a transformation, it is the story of a man consumed by forces beyond his control, who left behind a final message, not to save the world, but to be remembered as the person he used to be. He calls out to Betty. He forgot Betty, forgot his name, forgot who he was. And in that void, something else emerged. He began calling himself the Ice King. Then comes the Great Mushroom War. Let's rewind a bit, shall we? Before there was the land of Ooh, there was Earth. Still not the Earth we recognize, because by the time the Mushroom War was over, the sky had been filled with giant clouds shaped like mushrooms, the kind created by nuclear detonations. Beneath those clouds, cities were flattened and life was scorched from the surface. The very structure of the planet began to shift into something unrecognizable until all that remained was a broken world filled with strange new creatures and leftover horrors that gave birth to something entirely new. Her name was Marceline. As Simon wandered through the fallout and ruin, past collapsed buildings and radiation-soaked craters, he found a little girl sitting alone, crying in the middle of the apocalypse. Although he did not know her name at first, that girl would one day become the vampire queen, Marceline, though back then she was just a frightened child who had lost her family, her home, and any sense of what came next. And in that moment, Simon made a choice to protect her with everything he had left. As time went on, Simon became more than a protector. He became a father figure.
What is this?
Film before a live studio audience.
Norm!
Mute.
But every time danger crept in, he had to use the crown. And every time he did, he lost a piece of himself. His mind frayed, his thoughts twisted. Marceline saw it happening and begged him to stop. He promised he would, but he couldn't. The world was too dangerous. The threats never ended. Eventually, Simon made the hardest choice of his life. He left. It was not abandonment, it was love. He knew he was no longer safe to be around her. So before he vanished, he recorded one last message. A final video diary for Marceline. A goodbye.
Please love me again, Betty.
Okay, bye.
And somewhere before he completely broke, he found a way to summon her father, Hunson Abadir. A demon, yes. But Simon hoped that even a demon was better than nothing. After that, Simon disappeared. His mind faded, the crown took over, and at some point, he ended up under the control of the vampire empress. Probably through hypnosis, maybe through magic. No one really knows. Whether Marceline ever saw him during that time is unclear. If she did, it must have been unbearable. The man who once read her stories had become someone else entirely.
This was you, Simon, before the war.
Huh?
This is one of the most emotional pieces of the entire Adventure Time story. It redefines who the Ice King was. Not a joke, not a villain. A man who gave everything, who fought to keep someone safe and lost himself in the process. His fall wasn't explosive or loud. It was slow, silent, a quiet fade into madness. All that was left was a cursed crown, a forgotten name, and a girl who never forgot what he meant to her. In the land of Ooh, the Ice King was never seen as a real threat, but more like a ridiculous nuisance who flew through the skies in his ragged robes,
On Iceberg Lake before the Lich.
played clunky songs on his beat-up keyboard, and kidnapped princesses like it was some sort of full-time job he took way too seriously, which made him a recurring problem for Finn and Jake, who saw him as just another obstacle to punch through on their way to the next adventure. Not because he was evil in any real sense, but because he simply would not stop interfering with their world, their friends, or their peace. For many episodes, that was all he ever was. Just a joke, a running gag, a one-dimensional antagonist who caused problems, got defeated, and then came back again with a slightly more ridiculous plan. And in a show full of magical creatures, elemental forces, and ancient beings, he was often the most absurd of them all, never carrying the same weight or darkness as someone like the Lich or Hunson Abadir. And for a long time, no one questioned why he acted the way he did or what made him the way he was. However, just before we knew it, the show's pace started shifting. Little by little, the writers began peeling back the layers. There was something deeper underneath the madness, something broken, something tragic. Why was he always chasing princesses? Why did he speak like he already knew people who had never met him before? Why did he seem sad? That's when Simon started peeking through. Sometimes he would say something weirdly profound. Sometimes he'd sing a lullaby that only Marceline seemed to recognize.
Making me crazy, and I need to save you.
Wow, I wrote that. Hot stuff.
What? You don't remember what it means?
Other times, he would find one of his old videotapes and just sit there, confused, watching a man he didn't remember being. His mind was crumbling. He was never a villain. He was a victim. The crown cursed him. Didn't just give him power, it erased him from himself. His obsession with magical artifacts didn't just wreck his life. It pulled him into something darker, something colder. And the saddest part? No one knew who he used to be. Not even him. No one except Marceline. She remembered the warmth, the kindness, the sacrifice, and when their paths finally crossed again in the present, the pain of that shared past came rushing to the surface in a scene that was quiet, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Because while the Ice King sat there rambling nonsense and trying to write a silly song, Marceline sang words from their old life, filling the room with memories that only she understood. And for one fleeting moment, something inside him cracked just enough for Simon to come through. There was a flicker, a pause, a tear rolling down his cheek. Though he could not place why he felt it, the emotion was real because something deep inside him remembered her, remembered the love he had for her, the pain of leaving her, and the helplessness of knowing he was no longer strong enough to stay. But just as quickly as that moment arrived, it vanished, pulled away by the grip of the crown, and what remained was the Ice King once more, confused, lonely, and unaware of what had just slipped through his fingers. And although his name had been forgotten by most, and although his legacy had been reduced to a series of jokes and misadventures, there was still a small part of Simon buried within the madness. This part remembered Betty, the woman he had loved more than anything, and Marceline, the girl he had protected when the world had turned to ash. And even if he could not say their names or understand what they meant to him, that part still existed, trapped beneath layers of snow and silence. That is why his story is not just sad, it is devastating, because it is not about a man who chose to be evil, but about a man who gave everything he had to the people he loved, only to be consumed by the very magic he once thought would help him understand the world. In the end, all that remains is a broken wizard sitting alone in a frozen palace, desperate for connection, craving love, and utterly unaware that once upon a time he was someone who had it all. While the misadventure continues, the series draws closer to its inevitable conclusion. The Gum War is inbound, and everyone is doing their best to avoid the massive conflict. In a distant future, nearly 1,000 years after the Gum War, two adventurers, Beth and Shermie, uncover a rusted mechanical arm once belonging to Finn. Living in what used to be Marceline's home, they decide to learn more about the artifact and climb Mount Cragdor to meet the so-called King of Ooh, BMO.
The King of Ooh.
Welcome, friends. I've been expecting you.
Surrounded by relics from the past, BMO is annoyed when the two accidentally break some of his possessions and tells them to leave. However, when they show him Finn's old arm, he changes his mind and agrees to share the story of the Gum War. BMO recounts how, in the past, Finn and Jake were scouting for Princess Bubblegum when they spotted Normal Man Betty and Maya hovering above her army. Rushing back to report, they interrupt PB as she plans a battle with Marceline.
Understand?
No, not really.
Flame Princess, Lemon Grab, and others. A Gumbaldian spy is discovered and neutralized, prompting PB to sound the war horn despite Marceline's pleas to avoid repeating the past. Finn, sensing disaster, devises a plan. With Nightmare Princess's juice, he forces PB, Gumbald himself, Jake, and Fern into a dream realm, hoping to stop the conflict from within.
No! We need love, not war!
Good idea. Love bazooka!
There, chaos unfolds. PB and Gumbald clash inside a nightmarish Gumball Guardian. Fern transforms into a beast, and Finn tries to reason with him. Jake and Germain locate Finn's repressed memories, which ultimately help Fern destroy the grass demon, freeing himself but leading to his disintegration. Back in reality, just as peace is declared, Golb arrives with Kingman.
Okay, I'm not an expert, but this seems bad.
You ain't kidding, Shrubs.
Ice King has a flashback to Simon and Betty researching GOLB before the war. In the present, Golb unleashes monstrous energy that mutates Gumbald's army. Ooze heroes, Marceline, PB, Finn, Jake, and others, fight back, even as the Gumball Guardians are corrupted. Amidst the chaos, Ice King snaps Betty out of her trance by singing one of his silly songs, Oh, Fiona.
Oh, Fiona!
She reacts violently, pulling them both into Golb's maw. Finn follows but loses his arm in the process. Inside Golb, Ice King reverts to Simon and Betty to her human form. Betty sacrifices herself by using the crown to protect Simon at all costs, merging with GOLB in the process. As the new being leaves, the ice crown falls. Gunter grabs it, wishes to be like Ice King, and transforms into Ice Thing. Jake casually decides this is fine. Fern begins to fade and gives Finn a seedling shaped like the Finn sword. That night, Finn and Jake plant it in the ruins of their old treehouse, causing a massive tree to sprout. PB thanks Finn for stopping the war and kisses him on the cheek before leaving. In the future, BMO finishes his tale, telling Beth and Shermie that Finn and Jake simply lived their lives. As they leave, a giant sweet pea walks by carrying the Night Sword. Beth and Shermie later explore the remains of Finn and Jake's treehouse and climb the new tree. At the top, they find the new Finn sword. Shermie raises it triumphantly, echoing the pose Finn once struck, as the sword begins to glow, ending the story and the series. Meanwhile, in a series of closing scenes, we see how the lives of many characters turned out. Jake and Lady Rainicorn explore different dimensions. Lumpy Space Princess becomes queen. Ice Thing marries Turtle Princess. TV becomes a detective. Sweet Pea finishes school. PB and Lolly care for Nettie. Simon tries to bring Betty back with Prismo's help, but fails. Flame Princess and Neptar form a band. Marceline and Bubblegum continue living happily as a couple. Even the remaining humans, including Minerva, begin to live in ooh. Finally, as the music hole sings a soft, emotional melody about a feeling too specific to name,
Living so merrily.
the story of Adventure Time comes to a quiet, beautiful close. While the story comes to a close, Simon has another story to tell. For him, this was just another day of his life, and since he's now human again, this is the time for him to re-explore himself. Simon, now aged and visibly worn down by time, lives in quiet obscurity on the floating human island of Upton. His small one-room, one-bathroom house serves as part of a living exhibit in a zoo-like museum, a fully reconstructed 20th century dwelling with one open wall so visitors can observe an authentic 20th century man. Day after day, strangers ask him questions about a world long gone, treating him more like a relic than a person. Choose Goose, now corrupted by dark magic after drinking the ichor of Kokentepe, lives in a small cage inside the house. Simon's life has grown hollow. His isolation deepens his depression, and he quietly confesses that he sometimes misses being the Ice King, not for the madness, but because at least then he felt something. He's ashamed of the Fiona and Cake stories, dismissing them as a sad remnant of his damaged past. When Finn brings him on an adventure to cheer him up, Simon only feels like a bird too frail for the life he once knew. Later, as he walks home alone, he calls Marceline, who's with Princess Bubblegum getting a tattoo. He doesn't want to trouble her, so he simply promises they'll meet again soon and ends the call. Back home, Simon rediscovers the Fiona and Cake book he had thrown away earlier. Something in it rekindles a spark of inspiration. The evil entity in the cage, revealed to be Choose Goose, mocks Simon's hope of ever bringing Betty back. Desperate, Simon wires Goose into a magical apparatus, using him like a battery for a risky ritual. It appears to fail and seemingly kills Goose, but just as Simon mourns another failure, a portal opens in the back of his head, and to his astonishment, Cake tumbles out. Another portal follows, and out comes Fiona, who Simon initially believes is just another fragment of the Ice King's madness come to life. Soon after, Simon is yanked mid-shower into Prismo's time room, now wearing the Ice King's signature blue muumuu. There, Prismo interrogates him about Fiona and Cake's sudden arrival in Uu. Simon insists he did nothing, but Prismo reveals the truth. Their universe was Prismo's secret creation, hidden inside the Ice King's mind to bypass celestial rules. When the crown's magic faded and Ice King became Simon again, the Fiona and Cake universe lost its magic too. To fix this, Simon joins the two on a multiverse journey in search of a new magic crown, one powerful enough to restore their world. Their quest eventually leads Simon to Golbetti's dimension, where a failed ritual nearly sees him don the crown once again. Instead, Golbetti temporarily places his consciousness in the body of Shermie. There, Simon reflects on the obsessive, self-sacrificial nature of his relationship with Betty. This realization changes everything. Back in Golbetti's realm, he acknowledges that Betty is truly gone and chooses to let go of the past. The burden of saving Fiona and Cake's world finally becomes too much, and in a moment of clarity, Simon releases the universe from his mind, giving it to Fiona so it can exist on its terms. In return, Golbetti sends Simon back to Oo, no longer tormented by his failures. He begins to see his life not as a curse, but as something still worth living. So, where do we stand now? Simon's story teaches us that not all monsters choose to be monstrous. Sometimes they're victims of circumstance, clinging to pieces of who they were. He was never truly evil, just lost, warped by a magical crown and forgotten by the world. What we see in Simon is a warning. Identity is fragile. Memory, love, sanity, they can slip away piece by piece until the person inside is just a shadow. And yet, buried under layers of madness, humanity can still flicker. A lullaby, a name, a desperate plea. It reminds us that empathy matters, especially when someone seems beyond saving. But there's another lesson too about healing. When Simon becomes human again, he's not okay. He's grieving, isolated, stuck between who he was and who he became. There's no magic fix, no reward for suffering, just the long, slow process of rebuilding a life. And yet, by letting go of what he's lost, by choosing to move forward without answers or closure, he creates space for others to grow. Fiona and Cake get their world back. He gets peace. It's not perfect, but it's real. Simon's journey shows that even after unimaginable loss, there's still worth in choosing to live. And here we are at the conclusion. As always, let me know in the comments who you'd like to see in depth. Catch you next time.